Welcome to Talkin Divorce with Don and Lori.
Welcome. Today we're going to take a deep dive into what child custody evaluations are all about. And with us is Dr. Shirin. He is a child custody evaluator, and I've had the privilege of not only working with him, but getting to know him socially. And we're so glad to have you with us. And of course, we have Lori, my interviewer today. In fact, she's probably going to be doing most of the interview. Now, Dr. Shirin has a lot to talk about today, and we're going to start off by talking about some of the basics of child custody evaluations. So what is a child custody evaluation? Essentially, it's where two parents can't agree on how to raise their children by co-parenting, and they have lots of differences. And so the court appoints an expert to help the judge make a decision as to what's right for children. Dr. Shirin is that type of expert. So Lori's going to lead off with some foundational questions, Dr. Shirin.
Okay.
And then, of course, I'm going to jump in here and there. But we've got a lot to cover, so Lori, it's all yours.
Wonderful. Thanks, Don. So I always like to start off with just the simple basics and just a little bit about you and your education and what brought you to be a 730 form evaluator.
And I might say that I've seen your resume, and we would be here for hours. We went through every little thing that you have. You're one of the most accomplished people I've had the privilege of interviewing. So if you could tell us, maybe some of the educational things, but not all of it.
Not all of it. No, I look at my resume and I wonder how I must be really, really old to have done all those things. So,
Shh, you're about my age, so don't say
I know.
Okay.
Let's see, my education. I went to USC for a lot of my training. After getting my doctorate degree, I studied with Ralph Reitan, and I started doing originally neuropsychological evaluations and working, in the schools and the hospitals and things along those lines. And I was seeing a lot of patients, and I had an attorney who referred a case to me, and I saw them for probably, maybe 30 hours total. And they went and saw a child custody evaluator for about a half an hour. And the judge ended up going along with what that person said versus what I said. And I was scratching my head going, what the heck is going on in this program? That's when I started learning about child custody evaluations. And at that point, I then proceeded to start educating myself. And then I found several of the associations that exist and joined all of those. And I think I've taken every class along the road that I can. I have this perpetual wanting to learn all the time. That's why I didn't want to get out of college. I don't have to stay there for a long time. So that's kind of how I got started in this field, and that's been now over 30 some years ago, over 30 years. So, and I've done a few evaluations at this point.
Yeah.
Some with you and some with a whole bunch of other people. So does that kind of answer a little bit of that?
Yeah, it does. So given your span of over 30 years, approximately how many times have you been in court?
I've been an expert witness in trials over 100 times.
Okay.
I've done, besides 730 evaluations, I also do 733 evaluations, which is evaluating the evaluator, and I've done, close to 50 to 75 of those as well, and been in court for those. So I get to be in court a lot.
Yeah, we're going to talk today about 733s and your work in that area. When did you start doing child custody evaluations? I don't mean to divulge your age, Dr. Shirin. But
When did I start? Well, over 30 years ago, I started doing the evaluations, and they have certainly evolved considerably since then. I remember looking at one of my original ones that I did a long, long time ago, and I laugh when I look at it compared to what we do nowadays. That was a 15, 20-page report, and nowadays my average single-spaced is 60 pages. So they've gotten a lot more complicated.
it's still on the light side from what I see. I see some people with 100, 150 pages. So you're averaging still, you're brief compared to other people.
That's true. I am. I try to be factual. I try to be distinct in what I'm trying to explain and lay out. I look at it as my job is to figure out how to take the strengths and weaknesses of both of the parents so I can raise high-functioning kids. And I try to eliminate the extraneous things that don't need to be in there.
So I don't know if Lori thinks about this, but are there times in your career that you've come across a child that you evaluated and they're adults now? Have you ever run into parents, after your work is done or anything like that?
Well, it's an interesting profession that I'm in because there's always this concept of ex parte communication. I can write a report and they have a court trial and all that kind of stuff, but I really can't talk to anybody at all after that because they could always go back into court again, and if I've talked to anybody, that would be ex parte communication.
Yeah. I think what I meant was, let's say 10 years after the fact, some kid, you hear the story. I'm sure Lori's had teachers that you just loved, and you run into your teacher, 20 years down the road, and
Yeah.
if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have pursued this, and this expression of gratefulness. I don't know if child custody evaluators get that when they, that the type of validation that they probably should get.
I get a little bit of that. I think I probably get more positive feedback when I've done a 733 since I don't have any conflict at that point, and then I get lots of people who write me or even actually put things up on websites saying that how grateful they are of doing that. But most of the time, one person really doesn't like me.
Yeah, I could imagine. Parents?
Yeah. One of the parents typically doesn't like me, and they don't have a very good flavor, I guess, for me or whatever, and they like to write nasty things. They're
So
keyboard
how do
warriors.
so how do you balance with the parents and then the child? Because I know you're for the child.
Right.
So how does that factor in? Because I know a lot of time parents could, be
Overwhelmed,
pressured,
trying to
scared.
influence you.
Yeah. All of the emotions. It's crazy when your child is,
I've had parents try physically assaulting me in my office. I've had I'm trying to think of some of the ones that I've had where people have offered to do certain things for me and all that in the beginning of it, and I explained to them, I said, I may be for sale, but not that cheap. An island in the Bahamas with the jet and all that, maybe we could talk. But parents, typically when I get to see parents, they're in their best behavior they can be in the beginning. And so I'm going to get to see them basically at their best. And so I'm trying to look at, okay, this is the best version of you. So how am I going to deal with that? And where is the other part? And so, without giving up too many trade secrets, what I attempt to do is to figure out how it is that they are on a day-to-day basis.
Along those lines, I think it's a requirement, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you participate in some type of psychological testing for the parents. And it gives
It's not a requirement, but it's
not.
done
Okay.
by virtually every evaluator.
Okay. And does that help you in seeing the wrinkles and?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How so?
Well, psychological testing is really another tool that you have. And so the way I look at it, the way I was taught is that I'm looking at the multiple tools that I have, and I need to have multiple streams of data. And the multiple streams of data then start giving me an idea of what I have. In the case that I was in is that, the previous evaluator, didn't really took a personal liking, I guess, to one of the people in the case, and only talked about certain aspects of the psychological testing and just kind of took the rest and put it off to the side. And so I had to look at all of those kinds of things and rerun the data and found out that, oh, wait a minute, we have a whole different program here than what you have really originally thought. So what they do for me is they they're either confirming or disconfirming what I'm seeing. And if they're disconfirming what I'm seeing, then I need to try to look at how is that? Why did I see it different? Am I all wet? My feelers are off. What's going on? And usually I find that maybe I've been played a little bit. I'm susceptible to being played just like anybody else. But with all the different streams of data that I have, it makes it really hard to keep it that way.
It seems like in most cases, though, since people are in their best behavior, you're probably played a lot, right? Or people are trying to play you, I should say. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, because they're trying to win your favor.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's a bad parent. I'm the good parent.
I'm this well-structured parent.
That's so.
Yeah.
And then it all depends. How people try to present themselves, how they answer questions, how they don't answer questions. The psychological testing provides more of a structured part where you can actually have, data to back up different parts. And at that point, you have to start looking at, let me look at all the data and how does that fit into what everything else is going. I've got collaterals I got to talk to. I've got to look at all the court documents that are existing. I look at, and talking, they're having clinical interviews with them and the testing. So those things going together, then it gives me an idea what I have.
Good.
What about the time span? I mean, that sounds like a lot of work. How long does it typically take?
It takes 3 to 4 months to do one.
Okay.
And then it usually takes a month because by the time you get all the attorneys to sign all the documents, get them to the court, get them signed and all that. So then it adds another month on.
Is it like court ordered? Like they have to show up at X amount of time at your office, or like what's the
way
process?
it works is that I have a very unique position. Is that I am originally hired by the attorneys. I report only to the judge, but I'm paid for by the parents.
Okay.
So it gets really convoluted at that point. And some people they are trying to figure out what that all means. Sometimes I have attorneys who want to tell me how to do my job, and and that's just the way it goes. So what was the question again? No, I'm on a tangent there.
No, you answered it. The original question was, how long is the process? And
Right.
it's like 3 to 4 months, and then you were telling me about the different.
Well,
yeah.
I inherited this thing called a work ethic when I was growing up, and I tend to be. I love what I do. I look at it as that I was. God has given me lots of kids that I have to protect,
I
and
love
so
that.
it's not a job to me.
Yes.
Yeah. So 3 to 4 months is actually very efficient in my experience. I've seen some evaluators take a year. I had one that announced that she was going on vacation to Hawaii and she'd be back in about 4 or 5 months. That wasn't a very happy experience for my client. I can tell you that. So I'm glad to hear that.
Are you able to switch different form of it? No, like once you're locked in, you're locked into
You'd
one?
have to file a motion with the court and
Oh,
explain,
okay.
but it's very unlikely. Courts are extremely deferential to the child custody evaluators for good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine entertaining all these motions because somebody gets a bad feeling, a bad vibe, and they start making things up?
I see.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier, of everything that you do, that you are also an expert witness. So what's the difference with being an expert witness and being a 730 and a 733 evaluator?
Well, sometimes I'm brought into cases to talk about certain aspects where I didn't do any kind of evaluation, and they're just asking me to review documents or review something else that has gone on in the case. Sometimes it's, you're doing a psychological profile on somebody, and they can be called in to be doing that type of work.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think along with that, I know that sometimes people in your profession can help attorneys analyze like suicidal ideation versus real suicide attempts, and there's a whole body of knowledge that goes into, the dangers or the lack thereof, depending on, what the evidence is. And Dr. Shirin, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not in court all the time. I mean, you do a lot of work where you're not in court.
Right.
And even when you're doing custody evaluations, not all of those end up where you testifying. So you're
Correct.
Essentially helping people, make decisions. And a lot of times, we need experts for a variety of reasons, and Dr. Shirin would be able to provide that. Along those lines, the 733, we should probably talk about that because I know that most of our audience doesn't know what that means. And Lori's already kind of touched on that. Could you describe what a 733 evaluator does?
A 733 evaluator is somebody who evaluates the evaluation process and was it done properly to community standards, how it's supposed to be, and going through that work product that 730 evaluation that they did, and did they do it right? Did they? I mean, we're all human. We all make mistakes, but did the person can keep themselves in check for being biased in some way? Did like the one I was talking about earlier, where they kind of had a fond feeling for that. I don't think it was romantic, but they felt a kinship to that person, and so they manipulated the data to go along with that. And I don't think it was a purposeful thing. But I think it was more is that when you believe something, you then all of a sudden you have what's called as a confirmatory bias that occurs. You buy a new car, and what do you see on the road? That car everywhere. That's amazing. They weren't there any time before, right? But you got that new car, and you go, wow, I never know there were that many of them on the road.
Right.
Well, the same thing happens in this. You become, have some sort of feeling for that person. You like them better than the other one. The other one's really a jerk. And so now you start seeing things only in that light, and you start cherry picking data to validate your confirmatory bias. Because once it gets set, it's really hard to get rid of, because you have to really start paying attention to it.
Yeah, good point. So the audience knows, in case you haven't heard of the 733, that's when an attorney hires somebody like Dr. Shirin to evaluate and review the work of a court-appointed child custody evaluator. So a hypothetical would be, a parent isn't happy with how the recommendations were and suspects maybe something's wrong. They get to hire somebody to come in and say, and look at the report and then point out mistakes that were made. Now, there are some limitations to what a 733 evaluator can say in court. Can you describe that for us, please?
I'm going to outline what the challenges were in the case. And so if they didn't rely on multiple streams of data. They relied on certain streams. They decided not to use psychological testing. Or they only interviewed family and friends. Typically, family and friends are not going to tell you, the dark secrets that go on. If they do, then that's really a bonus. You really want to pay attention to that. But most of the time, they're going to tell you, oh, they're the sweetest, nicest person ever. It's just that other person who's really a bad person. And if it wasn't for them, everything would be fine. Okay. I stated this in court the other day, and somebody wanted to correct me. But I always said, Mother Teresa doesn't marry Hitler. It's kind of, they got, both people have some issues.
Right.
I'm not here to pick and choose the issues. It's what part did the evaluator lock into? And did they do a real research about what it is that's going on? Or did they just buy into one thing?
Yeah, when you said that, about the confirmatory bias, I'm thinking about my experience of sitting on a jury one time in my life, and I'm a former police officer, former prosecutor, so you could guess as to what I'm thinking when I'm watching the presentation, in court. Of course, I'm thinking about the presentation. I'm not really looking at the evidence. Of course, I've got a bias that everybody arrested is guilty, and I had the hardest time really just focusing on, hey, stay fair and stuff. So our biases do come in, and that could happen with the child custody evaluator as well.
Absolutely.
So you have a client that hires you as 733 and says, Dr. Shirin, I want you to conduct the evaluation from the onset. I want you to conduct all the interviews and talk to the collaterals and do psychological testing. What are you going to tell them?
That's not what a 733 is. I'm going to look at the work product that the person that you already had as that 730 evaluator put together. I'm not here to review all the documents. I'm not here to redo the 730. I'm here to make sure that what they did followed the rules. If it doesn't follow the rules, then I'm going to lay out for you how they didn't follow the rules. If they did follow the rules, then you're not going to get much of a report from me because they followed what they needed to do. You know, and they did the right job. I'm not going to go back and review all the documents. If you want me to hire me to do that, that's going to be now going to become the expert for the attorney, and that's a different job. That's a different hat that I have to put on.
Yeah, so to make it clear, a 733 evaluator is not permitted to redo an evaluation. 730s are the court's witnesses. 733s are the attorneys or the client's witnesses, and there's
Yeah,
a
exactly.
clear difference between that.
And Dr. Shirin, what are your goals when you're conducting a 730 child custody evaluation?
To me, the goal is and I tell patients when I first talk to them, our clients, is that I'm not here for moms or dads. I only care about the kids. I have a bias that I want to raise high-functioning kids. And if that's not good for you, then you need to find somebody different, because I'm not looking to raise vegetables. I want to give these kids the environment that they can flourish in the best they can. So that's sort of my goal is how can I help with the strengths and weaknesses. They all have strengths and weaknesses, the parents. But, you know, some of those strengths and weaknesses can be used to help the children, you know. It's not to go, oh, well, he does this bad. Well, does that have an effect really on how we're going to raise the kid? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
Where does that passion come from? Because it's very interesting. I love hearing that your heart's in the right place. You're saying, you know, I'm trying to raise high-functioning kids. So you have obviously an understanding of the dysfunction that goes along with divorce and stuff.
Right.
But there's a passion that I'm hearing behind that. So where does that come from?
I don't know. I guess my upbringing, and you know, having patients for many years, and you know, being that therapist type person, you know, a long time ago. I don't do any of that anymore. There's not enough time. You know, I have to sleep every once in a while. You know, I think that's where it kind of comes from. Is that my love for kids.
You serve as an evaluator not only for Los Angeles County, but as I understand it, there's many other jurisdictions that you've served as an expert. Where have you worked for? You know, which jurisdictions have you been part of the process?
Well, right now it is from Fresno County to San Diego County, and I just started another case now in Sacramento County, and I'm wondering why I'm doing that. And I have Nevada now wanting me to do evaluations there, so I need a plane, I think, or something.
Yeah,
I don't
you
know
need
how
a
I'm gonna
private
do-
jet.
I do. I don't know how I'm going to do all this. So it keeps expanding, and I need to figure out how I can deal with that. You know,
Learn to say no, Dr. Shirin.
I guess I'm not good at that.
So one of the things that I wanted to really ask you is what are the limitations? Maybe I should put it a different way. What doesn't a child custody evaluator do? You know, contrary to what parents think that you're there for.
Oh, that's a great question.
That is a good question, because and I even spell it out in my stipulation and letting people know in the beginning as well, is that I'm not here to give you any advice whatsoever. You have conflicts, you have things that need to be resolved. I'm not the person that can do that. I'm not wearing that hat. And I try to explain to them I only wear one hat in this process, and that's an evaluator. I'm not a therapist. I'm not somebody who can give you advice on anything. So that's where the limitations I find for me come in, and I think that's what the codes really talk about and all the associations. Some people have a challenge that they have a little hall tree with a lot of hats on it, and they change the hats every once in a while.